This is a quick introduction to Model Builder in ArcGIS Pro, and it's a way to establish and record workflows that are complicated and you want to follow through once, or more importantly, that you may want to repeat several times, even if they're not so complicated. Now, we're going to be doing a flowchart here first, and this is the more or less idea. So we have an input DEM, and I want to basically calculate the raster flow lines. And so I first do the flow direction, then the flow accumulation, which requires a flow direction, and I reclass to get the high flow lines, and I convert that to polylines. We want to do that in a workflow where we can input different DEMs, perhaps, because we might have to do this quite a lot, and specify an output file, and then just tell it to run. We could also have a flow threshold, that is a flow accumulation amount, above which we call it a stream or a flow line, as a parameter. So we're going to go through how to build this quickly as an example of something that you might want to automate. Now, it's really simple. There's very few operations here, I think 4, but you might want to do this again and again, so why not make a tool that does just that? And so we start a project here. I have a new empty project 18.gdb is the database, and it's my project 18 that took the default names. And if I want to create a model builder model, I have to go to the geoprocessing window and basically go to the analysis window. We'll be working back and forth with these. So this tab, geoprocessing on the right, and the analysis window to start model builder. But I'll want to drag things also out of the catalog. And so I want to add my base data to the catalog. And many of you might not have done this, but if I go to the right click and I add a database, I can search through my folders and find the database that has my data in them. Now here I have mine in the courses 4295, and I have a twitchy mouse, and so it will take a second to get to the data. And so if I add these data here to my catalog, they show up, and then I can look at the data and drag these data into my map, and then they'll be more easily accessible because I can drag from the toolbar, or I can drag straight from here a catalog into my model builder. I'm going to do it dragging it onto the map first because that makes it a bit more visual. So I have my study area DEM. It's a small DEM that I have, and I can drag it onto the canvas. And then my practice pour points. So I'm going to pull those on because I'll need those eventually when I calculate the watersheds for these in a subsequent video. But for now, we're just going to use the DEM to start. And so I go to the Analysis tab and click on Model Builder, and I get a Model Builder canvas that shows up. And then I put together my workflow. So first I'm going to start with the digital elevation model, and this is my study area, DEM. And then I can go to the geoprocessing tool and search for the names, the exact name, or I could try typing them in. But this thing, the first thing I need to do is I need to do a flow direction. And it shows up here at the top as flow direction. So I left click, drag, and drop, and I get then this flow direction box, which is the tool, the operation, and then its outputs. Now I'm not going to use this output drop raster, so I'll just left click, hold, and drag it out of the way. And then what I can do is draw lines from a data layer into one of these tools, and it opens into asking me which of the parameters, which of the inputs I want. And I'm going to make this my input surface raster. And you see how it turns from gray to colored when the parameters are defined. They might not be defined correctly, but at least they're defined. Also notice that I can reposition multiple pieces by left-clicking and dragging and selecting them all and pulling. Or I can reposition individual pieces by left-clicking and holding and dragging. So here I have a study area or an input DEM, the flow direction, and outputs this flow direction raster. Well, after flow direction, we do flow accumulation, if you remember. in watershed processing, and it's similar here. We want the flow accumulation because we're going to use that as a threshold. And again, it outputs or shows onto the canvas here the function and then the output. So if I do a left and drag from my data to my tool, it asks me what do I want this to be, and I'm going to make it the flow direction raster. There may be other inputs. In this case, this input weight raster is optional. I wouldn't know that except I've looked up this flow direction, uses flow direction raster. So I'll just click this flow accumulation and it gives me an output flow accumulation raster. Now, a couple of things. These are temporary. They get saved into the default geodatabase. In this case, in my catalog, it's going to be the one set at default. This is my project. I can change that with an environment variable in another place I'm not going to show now. And they'll get overwritten each time I run the process. So I could copy these, or I could set a parameter that makes them not overridable. But that just means the first time through, they'll create it, and then after that, it won't. So I won't do any of that in this case, just so you know that they're there. Well, after we get the output flow accumulation raster, we want to do a threshold with a reclassify. So I go to this reclassify, and I'm only typing it in just because it's easier to do the reclassify tool, dragging it from the toolbox or the list here on the side. If I knew where it resided in the toolbox, I could list the geoprocessing toolboxes on the side and show those. So if I knew or had a toolbox open, you can drag out of the toolbox also. But I'm just doing the searches here and having them show up. So I have this reclassify, and this one's a little different because although I can drag and drop a line from the output flow accumulation raster, if you remember in reclassify, you have to identify a table. So this will go ahead and run, but there's no table identified, so it'll just give me a blank output raster. So if I basically right-click on the tool, so I'm right-clicking over reclassify and open it, it gives me the option of identifying or defining other parameters. And so I want to specify the tool value here. And remember, for reclassify, we basically make things that are from 0 to some threshold a background, and I'm going to put my threshold here at 300 meters, 300 square meters. So anything that's contributing less than 300 square meters or receives from 300 square meters gets no data. So if there's 300 cells or less that drain into a particular cell, it's going to get no data. If it's greater than 300, so I'm going to go 300 to whatever the largest is, and I'm going to put just a really big number here. I know it's smaller than this. It'll get a value of 1. So I'm setting up the table here inside the tool, and I'll change missing values to no data also. Now it's going to give an output raster default name, and you notice it's going to go into the whatever I specified last, so I can save it into a real directory, or it'll go back into my, if I just right click on this or hover over it, you can see it goes to the My Project 18 geodatabase. So I can direct it to a different geodatabase or save it to the default. I'm going to leave it at the default. So that's okay. So this is the reclass flow. And the last thing we have to do once we have this reclass then is convert it from a raster to a vector. And so I'm going to do the raster to polyline search, and I'll drag that out. And then raster to polyline, it's the same idea. I come here from, so left click, hold and drag from the reclass output raster to the raster to polyline, and I specify that as the input raster. And then I have this output set of features. Now, I could right click on this and say, I want to use different input DEMs. So I could make that a parameter. That means when I run it outside of the model builder development canvas, it makes me specify what the input DEM. If I'm always going to be using the same DEM, I wouldn't make that a parameter, and I'm just going to be running it inside this project. But often you make it a parameter because you're going to be running it outside the project. The other thing I want to do is maybe make this output. I might be running it several times, make this output a parameter. So it's going to ask me for the output name so I can save the output to different locations. So once I've created this model, I want to go ahead and save it. And so it saves it to a location, and you often wonder, where is that location? If I look in the catalog, in my toolboxes, in my project toolbox, it saves this model. This is model 1. And so it's saved there to that toolbox. So once I have my tool created, I need to validate it and then run it. So I'll go ahead and save it. And then I'll do the validate. And it runs through, and if there's any errors, it'll show up as a red, and then it will basically notify you where the error is. It's not very good error parsing, but at least gives you an idea of how far it made it. And then I can go ahead and run it. And this will take a bit, so I'll cut back after it's done running. But I left click here on the run, it starts and runs through each of those steps, giving me update in this panel. So once it's done, it shows here that it completed all the processes, and there's no red in here, which it shows when it's run into some problem. And it doesn't look like anything's changed. If I look at my geodatabase here and open it up, there's nothing new there, but you typically have to refresh. So I'll right-click, refresh the geodatabase, and then it shows me all the new things that it calculated, including this new raster reclass 1 that was the default it put for my output flow line. So I can drag that then onto my surface, and it shows then these flow lines that it calculated. Now if I want to run this model again, if I double click on the model, it'll ask me what are the parameters, what's my DEM, and I could go find a different DEM if that's what I want to do the DEM for, and also allow me to show it in then, or save it in to a different location.